And for some people, a cup of tea and a biscuit, that's how they would define hospitality. I mean, that's how we do hospitality at church, isn't it? The hospitality committee, they're the ones that are responsible for flicking on the urn and making sure that the biscuits aren't too stale. Not that biscuits hang around too much at our church. I think they get cleaned out every week. But I suppose moving beyond the tea and biscuits into a spirit of, biblical hospitality, or some would say Manaakitanga. Joining us on the program now is Matt Maslin. Matt, kia ora, thanks for your time today.
Kia ora. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, I mean, not exact translations, hospitality and Manaakitanga. I mean, they do mean different things, but perhaps Manaakitanga closer to the biblical, original biblical meaning of hospitality than the way some of us think of it today.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point, and a good reason for us to engage with Te Ao Māori and the Te Ao Māori worldview, and because I think with Indigenous cultures we do sometimes find that, right, that sometimes they align a little more closely to the biblical worldview than our Western worldview.
Yeah.
And the concept of Manaakitanga, upholding, caring for, tending to the mana of the other, recognizing their inherent worth, no matter who they are. And also recognizing our own inherent worth as people who are worthy of receiving hospitality. These are really kind of helpful ways of thinking about hospitality. I think they're biblical ways of thinking about hospitality. And you've kind of touched on already one of what I'd say is two misunderstandings of hospitality today. The first being, we've kind of watered down hospitality to mean a merely vague, civilized form of an entertainment, really. Or,
Yeah.
Henri Nouwen says, hospitality now has become about tea parties, bland conversations, and a general atmosphere of coziness. And
Yep.
and I think that's I think that's fair. That's often how we talk about hospitality. But I think a bigger challenge to hospitality is the fact that hospitality has become an industry. We talk about the hospitality industry.
Yeah.
And if we think about the way this impacts the way we care for other people, this is no small point. So if we think about hotels, they care for our weary now. Hospitals care for our sick now. Hospices care for our dying. Rest homes care for our elderly. Restaurants care for our hungry. And we've talked the other week about how charities care for our needy.
Yep.
And so the problem we have is that caring for others has been outsourced to the marketplace.
Yep.
Now, there's some very good hospitals where you're not going to catch me arguing against the existence of hospitals. These are really great things, and they've really elevated the way in which we can care for others.
Yep.
But it does raise questions about what the church does, what its role is, but also for our shared humanity. How do we care for each other? What are the complications of just outsourcing these kind of things to the marketplace?
Exactly. And I just think that simple aspect of welcoming, and going back to that biblical example, the importance of being able to offer a place to stay, and the stranger comes along, you feed them a meal, you wash their feet, you send them off with a blessing. Yeah, okay, society has changed a little bit, but just that sacrificial welcoming, that aspect of honouring the mana of strangers in a way where we're doing this not because of some reciprocal thing so that we get stuff back, but we do it just because it's the right and decent thing to do. I think we've kind of dropped the ball on that one a little bit.
Yeah, I think we have. And actually, we think of this as kind of a new problem. And it's certainly a problem that has been, exacerbated by capitalism and neoliberalism and kind of this, pretty much everything's for sale at the moment. But actually, this is a problem that John Calvin, the great reformer, picked up on in the early 1500s. He wrote, that the ancient hospitality celebrated in histories is unknown to us, and that the inns now supply the place of accommodation for strangers.
Wow.
So, this is over 500 years ago, and here's John Calvin, and he's going, something's happened here. The kind of biblical hospitality that we used to offer um, is now being outsourced to, the inns in his time.
Yeah.
And to me, that's really interesting. He's picked up on this concept, and he's starting to get a bit worried about it. And actually, on Sunday I was sitting in church, and the gospel reading happened, and it's last week was about Christ being the good shepherd.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's I think, and thinking about this stuff and listening to this gospel passage, it's really interesting to me because it talks about Jesus being the good shepherd,
Hmm.
um, and he's a good shepherd because he cares for his flock. He's willing to lay down his life for his flock. But then it says the hired hand doesn't care for his sheep.
Yeah.
Um, and thinking about that, so it was really interesting to me because what it seems to be picking up on is that something subtractive happens when care becomes caught up with currency. That somehow it dilutes the value of our caring, and was something I hadn't spotted before in the scriptures.
Yeah, totally. And hey, don't want to demonetize the whole aspect of caring for people, because we need to, as church communities, we do need to invest in this. And I think there is an aspect of hospitality again which needs to be sacrificial. We're not just doing this so that we can, I don't know, have better networks or show people up or impress them with what fancy houses we have or anything like this. We're doing this because we genuinely care, and there is a cost to hospitality. And perhaps as churches, we need to recognize that yes, just as we ask people to be generous in giving and supporting church organizations, perhaps if that was also demonstrated by church organizations with the generous way in which they supported other people. And hey, many churches and Christian organizations do this already, but perhaps there's a lesson from that is, hey, this is just Christianity 101. This is how we should be doing life.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think that the main cost to us of doing hospitality is our comfort.
Yep.
Um, and really the dream in many Western cultures is the dream of just being left alone. I can't wait to retire and just be left alone, and we kind of set up kingdoms of comfort for ourselves, and we want to live in kind of insulated, private, atomized ways, really.
Yep.
And that is comfortable and it's nice, but it's not really the kingdom of God.
Mm.
And um, and I find I was kind of tracing the theme of the table through the Gospels a few weeks back for a sermon. It's really interesting to me that Jesus was a carpenter, and I'm sure he made some tables and
Yep.
thought about their purpose. And then we kind of see that Jesus reorders the table as well. Who sits at the table? Where they sit at the table? Who's important? And kind of flips that on his head.
Yep.
He flips the table in the temple to cleanse it of kind of rampant consumerism and
Mm-hmm.
the degradation of the love of God, really. He sat at the table with the disciples and broke bread, one
Yep.
of our most important sacraments, and says, when you do this, remember me. And then on the road to Emmaus, and this was what I was preaching from the other week,
Mm.
um, you know, Jesus tells them how all the scriptures relate to him,
Yep.
and the disciples don't get it. And it's not till he sits down at the table, it's
Mm.
face to face, he's sharing his life with them, breaking bread with them. It's only then that they realize they're sitting with the resurrected Christ. And so I think the table was a really important part of what Jesus was doing, of how he talks about hospitality and welcoming other people in. The table can be uncomfortable. You
Yep.
you have to sit next to people you might otherwise not sit next to. I think of that. I think it's an old Pink Bats ad where the couple's trying to leave at the end of the night, but they're so comfortable because
Oh,
of
yeah.
the insulation supposedly. But sharing life with others can be uncomfortable,
Mm.
especially when extra grace required people.
Yep.
Um, but it's part of the kingdom of God. And that's really, I think, at the core of hospitality is opening your life up to someone else, letting them see who you really are, and welcoming the life of the other, and graciously accepting and welcoming them in as well.
And I suppose one possible measure of this, how do we respond when we say, oh, great news, we've got some relatives coming to stay, they'll be here a week? For most of us, or it depends on the relatives, I suppose, but for most of us, that's a struggle. And I think we've all been through it with the lockdowns we've had in previous years of going, oh, isn't this great? I just get to be in my own little bubble. But that's not the way that God requires us to live. Come out of those bubbles and seek the lonely and the lost. No mai haere mai. Welcome them to the table. Be generous in our hospitality. Matt, some literal and theological food for thought there. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.